The 2016 presidential election, Democratic Party delegates, presented by the Citizen Genius Project. The Democratic Party is led by the Democratic National Committee, which makes the rules for its presidential nomination process. The 2016 Democratic presidential nominee will be officially selected at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. There will be a total of 4,764 delegates at the convention who select the party's nominee for president. This person needs to win support from a majority of the delegates, which is at least 2,383 delegates. As a quick side note, this video discusses several topics that are more fully explained in other videos. There are two types of delegates, pledged delegates and superdelegates. There are 4,051 pledged delegates and 713 superdelegates, which means about 85% of the Democratic Party's delegates are pledged. The pledged delegates are selected by voters in primary elections and caucuses, and they are pledged to support a particular candidate based on the results of the primary elections and caucuses. From February through June of 2016, the primaries and caucuses are held in each of the 50 states, Washington, D.C., U.S. territories, and among Democrats living abroad. To keep the terminology simple, going forward I'll just say states. The Democrats use a proportional system, which means that any candidate who wins at least 15% support in a state's primary election or caucus gets a portion of the state's delegates. For example, New Hampshire's 24 pledged delegates could be divided among 3 candidates like this. The Democratic National Committee gives states 3 types of pledged delegates that candidates strive to win. These are congressional district delegates, at-large delegates, and pledged party leaders and elected officials. More specifically, each candidate wins a portion of the congressional district delegates based on the voting results within each congressional district. The number of delegates each congressional district receives varies based on each district's Democratic vote in recent elections. In each district, any candidate that receives at least 15% support gets a portion of that district's delegates. The at-large delegates are awarded to candidates based on the amount of support each candidate receives statewide. As long as a candidate receives at least 15% support, he or she gets a portion of the at-large delegates. Each state's pledged party leaders and elected officials are people who serve as delegates because they hold office within their states. Just as with the at-large delegates, any candidate that receives at least 15% support statewide wins a portion of these delegates, and these delegates are pledged to support the candidate they are allocated to. The Democratic National Committee's document detailing each state's delegate allocation is scrolling across the screen. Pause the video to examine the information more thoroughly. There are rules for each state's delegation. First, each state's delegation must be made up of 50% men and 50% women. Second, each state must have goals for the number of delegates who are African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders. Third, each state must make efforts to get underrepresented groups involved. As mentioned earlier, in addition to the 4,051 pledged delegates, the Democratic Party also has 713 superdelegates. Superdelegates get their position automatically because they hold a certain office, such as being a member of the Democratic National Committee, a member of Congress, a state governor, or a distinguished party leader. Superdelegates are unpledged, so at the convention they are free to support any candidate. In short, people vote in primary elections and caucuses to allocate the pledged delegates. Then those delegates and the superdelegates go to the Democratic Convention and select the party's nominee. The candidate who receives a majority of votes becomes the Democratic nominee for president. If no candidate receives a majority of votes after the delegates vote the first time, the pledged delegates become free to vote for any candidate, and then the delegates continue voting and negotiating until a candidate receives a majority. After the Democratic Party's presidential candidate is chosen, he or she moves on to the general election. This has been a short overview of the 2016 presidential election, Democratic Party delegates, presented by the Citizen Genius Project.